Welcome to the Even Better podcast, where your host, Sinikka Waugh of Your Clear Next Step, brings you exciting content about making communities better by helping people get even better at work.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Even Better podcast. This is Sinikka Waugh, and on behalf of all of us here at Your Clear Next Step, we are so glad to offer you some tips to help your workday get even better. I am delighted to introduce to you today my friend and colleague, Jeremiah Terhark. Jeremiah, thank you so much for making time to be part of this podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So Jeremiah and I met a few years back through some work we were doing through a mutual business partner. And we are talking specifically today about some lessons that Jeremiah has learned over the years of running a small business and growing that business. So in order to do that, though, we got to talk a little bit about the context and a little bit of background. So let me introduce to our listeners, Jeremiah, I'll just introduce a little and then I'll let you tell your story. So what I know about Jeremiah is that he founded WebSpec Design in 2001. I know that he is deeply passionate about marketing online and working closely with his clients to make sure that the goals that they desire are achieved. He is doing all sorts of things in his organization, right? Managing upcoming projects, website projects. He interacts with clients. He does programming. Just a wonderful ability to navigate through small business and still stay close to the work and really tap into that entrepreneurial spirit and his passion and talent for technology. So with that, I would love to, Jeremiah, hear your story a little bit. Maybe tell us a little bit about your story. How did WebSpec Design come to be, and a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am originally from North Central Iowa. I grew up in Hancock County on a farm up there. I'm a fourth generation farm kid. And so during the summertime, I'd be helping. My family had a few hundred cattle, and we even had buffalo for a time. And I'd be walking beans and also detasseling. And I always had an interest in technology, but we were very rural Iowa, so we didn't even have internet. So I got a stack of books from the library, and we did have a computer, and I volunteered at a local computer shop to just learn more about building computers. And ultimately I built a computer and had a friend that lived about 20 miles away in Clemmy, Iowa. And so I would drive over to his house and bring floppy disks to start with and upload. And I was learning in the late 90s, so it would have been 99, 2000. So in the cities, it'd be much more common to have internet at that point, but in the country, it was a little bit difficult. So you'd have your dial up and it'd be very spotty, especially where we were on the farm. So I drive over to his house and upload different files and maintain some personal interest sites I was into Macintosh computers at the time, and we would just test things out and see if they worked or not. In the summer going into 2001, there's the Hoover Presidential Library, and they have a foundation whose mission is in the spirit of Herbert Hoover, the President Herbert Hoover, that high school students who are specifically juniors can submit a project. It could be entrepreneurial, or it could be humanitarian or community involvement in that legacy, and pitch a project, work on it over the course of the summer, and then present it to a board, which at that time it was former Governor Robert Ray was one of the panelists for the organization. So I had this interest in computers and programming and websites. And I also aspired to go to college, and I needed a way to earn money to pay for that. So I formalized that specifically in a business where I could earn income to pay for college. And the business concept was accepted, and I named it WebSpec Design. So the meaning of it was that I would be building tools for the web to the specifications that the customers might have. And so I really took the skills that I had been working over those previous few years and went door to door along Highway 18 in northern Iowa. Again, I was a high school student, so I went to an auto dealership and just a wide variety of stores. So that first summer, I was able to talk 3 people into hiring me to produce a website. So I had to learn how to build an early inventory system for an auto dealership. And then I built, it was called Boyd Bears, but there was Beanie Babies that were very collectible at that time. And so there was a small town frame shop in the town of Belmont, Iowa. And I built a store that sold Boyd Bears, which were collectible like Beanie Babies. And then people from all over the country started buying those. And the store had been a little bit in decline in the area. And that helped the store stay open for several years longer than she had shared with me than it would have been able to stay open otherwise. So I was able to work that first summer on starting the business and getting some of those customer relationships and then present it to the Hoover Association. And then now, 20 years later, I'm still working on that summer project. So.
Wow, that's amazing. So Jeremiah, you like in your story, you talk about the work ethic that I have just seen over and over and over again in Iowa farm kids. Man, I chose to live here because of the tenacity and the stick with itness and the no fear of hard work. And then your entrepreneurial spirit, where you went door to door and said, here, I'm not even sure I know how to do this yet, but let me sell it to you. That's phenomenal. Thank you.
Yeah, and we definitely got some rejection, but most people were pretty nice. So yeah, I had to convince those initial customers that I knew enough of what I was doing to be able to produce that. So.
Outstanding. So our listeners, we've got some in the IT space. We've got some who work in corporate America. We've got some who are business owners. We've got some who are not working outside the home right now. So we've got listeners who listen from all different perspectives and all different walks. And I think as the Even Better podcast, one of our missions is to help you have a better work day wherever work is for you. And as we're listening to Jeremiah's story and some of the insights he's going to share, I don't think that any of these are limited to technology. I don't think any of these stories are limited to Iowa. I don't think they're limited to a business owner. The learnings and the lessons that Jeremiah is going to share with us today, I've had a sneak peek on some of the topics. And so I invite listeners, open your ears, because Jeremiah's got some great insights to offer, and they're not just for business owners. So one of the perspectives, Jeremiah, that you bring to the table is an awareness of technology and awareness of the internet. And I think you started us down that path thinking about the way the internet has changed and even internet access changed in rural Iowa compared to today. Catch us up just a little bit. What are some of the changes that you've seen in the internet based on your business, WebSpec Design, in the last 20 years?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of fundamentals that are still the same. So really, when I started the business, I believed that the web address for a business really was just as important as that front door driving by the business. And nowadays, my belief is that it's even more important, because if you think of yourself when you're Googling a business or looking up or deciding if you want to work somewhere or engage with someone, you're probably going to go to Google, type it in, and see what you can find for reviews and information about that company. So 20 years ago, that maybe wasn't in the forefront. A lot of the initial customers I had, I was explaining the importance of having a website, but now it's just a given. It's an expectation that it's going to be out there, it's going to be professional and up to date. So, and if it's not, then it's putting the organization at a disadvantage to other competitors. So one tool that's out there that we like to use and I really enjoy is called archive.org. And it's almost like a historical encyclopedia of the internet. So it's really fun to go in and type in even a site like Amazon or Yahoo and go backwards for 20 years and see just how, by today's standards, how amateur those look, where they've got animated, it's called GIF icons, it's a little bit cartoonish. So it's just kind of a fun little exercise. If you think of today, back in 2001, there wasn't smartphones really weren't a thing. But now today, the majority of the traffic on the internet is actually driven by smartphones and smart devices. So we're really focusing on that mobile interaction on sites, tying everything. How does it relate to social media? So much of the traffic is coming from social content, whether it's browsing on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or video content. So.
Wow. Yeah. And before 2001, before smartphones, we were before all of those social media platforms. And it feels to me that the world of the internet, like the world got smaller in the last 20 years. But the opportunities, maybe because the world got smaller, the opportunities extend further. And is it harder work today, Jeremiah, than it was?
It's very interesting because in some ways it's much easier. So a small business like maybe let's say a coffee shop, there's a lot of different tools that you could go out and set up an online presence very quickly, like a Squarespace or Wix. And a lot of times people just starting out, I may refer to a service like that. But for a larger organization that's going to be concerned about someone with disabilities using their website or needs to conduct online business or business functions, it's become very complicated because of all the different types of devices. And then also the day-to-day security, where most sites are being attacked all during the day from all parts of the world. So, and several major organizations just in the last year have had data compromised. So it's really a round the clock task to try to continue to keep sites and platforms secure. And in our business, we have adapted. We've always been aware of new technology that comes available, but it's not uncommon that in a 6 to 12 month period, some of the specific tools we might be using or the new frameworks or platforms that come out change significantly. So we've really had to have a culture of we're always learning new things, always implementing new things, but trying to do it in a way where you're not picking a fad, because if you pick something that's popular for a short time, then you're guiding yourself as well as the clients down a road where you're going to have to rebuild things pretty quickly. So trying to determine what things are fad and what things are going to become the standard eventually.
Yeah.
Which in our case, fortunately, we did the language that we specialize in is called PHP. So back 15 plus years ago, it would have been more common to create a custom proprietary content management system. So you could go in and make updates to the website without actually being a developer. But we discarded our custom system and gravitated to WordPress about 15 plus years ago when it became pretty popular as a open source framework and got really good at that. And that ended up being a pretty good choice because now most of the internet for public facing websites are run on open source platforms like WordPress and Drupal. And another system we use is called Laravel for web-based software. And all of those are ultimately have aspects of open source with them, which just gets more functionality and more people across the world working on these platforms to advance the tools available to the customers.
That's phenomenal. The balancing act to watch something like technology grow and change and adapt, and then to have that discernment about where do you follow, which path do you go down? How do you recommend something that is the right or a lasting option for your clients? That's awesome.
Yes.
So we're talking today about 4 lessons you learned in growing a small business. And as I looked through this list of things that you've learned, I just want to reiterate that they're not just for growing a small business from 1 to 60 employees, although congratulations on that going from 1 person to 60, that's really remarkable. But let's talk about these 4 lessons and just hear your story about how that came to be. So your first lesson learned in growing a small business from 1 to 60 employees was change your hats. So you talked about changing your hats. What does that mean to you, Jeremiah?
Well, when you first start a business that it started out with just one person. So I had to be not only learning how to build the websites or learn software development, but I also had to be providing customer service. When we opened the office and settled here in the Des Moines area, everything from answering the phone to doing the books to working on tax accounting. So I was forced initially to do every aspect of the business, but at a certain point, and I think people in business, it's a point of struggle where they start to get busy to where, 1, you can't do everything yourself. And number 2, there's probably no one is good at everything. So there's probably people out there that are better than you are at many of the different tasks that you're trying to do. So I did hire probably the first employees early on were doing graphic design and web development. So I continued to grow based on whether it was referrals or word of mouth or people finding us online. Once we opened the office and we got to the point of about 20, 25 people, and I was doing sales during the day and I was doing programming during the night and sometimes all night long if it was, because when you have those original clients, they are preferential to having me do the work. So then I was doing sales, trying to manage employees, trying to make sure we were billing, I would get behind on things like billing. So then we would do all this work, and then I would try to get all the billing out, and then I would try to get back and catch up at the work. And ultimately, I wasn't able to do really any of those tasks the best that I could because I was overcommitted on everything I was doing. So I hired a AIB grad. Her name was Brianna. And I had gotten so oversubscribed on what I was doing. When it came to trying to train, I had to say, just pull up a chair, and I don't know where to start. But she was phenomenal, and she really was able to observe the different things that I was doing during the day on the business aspects and take over some of the billing and things like that, so that they were able to learn. And ultimately, she was able to create processes and procedures around some of those tasks to really make that go a lot smoother and better than I had ever done it to begin with. So just learning and recognizing, and I think my advice would be, I perhaps did too much for a little bit too long. So it made it more difficult to hire and train people because I was just always trying to catch up. So I think just recognizing what that point is, because if you don't do that, eventually then you get burnt out, and then it's just too much. So
Absolutely. And I would say there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of small business owners across the planet who would recognize that, oh yeah, I tried to do all of it too soon or for too long. And maybe felt that pain. So I love that you're calling that out. But I think it applies to not just as a business owner, but as you're growing in any season of growth, right? Looking at what are the hats that I have to wear? What are the hats that I can train or groom someone else to wear? What are the hats that someone else should be wearing better, or should be wearing because they would wear it better than I would? I think that's sage counsel, whatever you're growing, whether it's a business or a team or a particular product or wherever you happen to be.
Absolutely.
So we'll move to the second one. 4 lessons learned in growing a small business. The second one is manage the cash. Oh, cash is king, right? Manage the cash. What does that mean, Jeremiah?
Yes. Over the years, I've worked with well over 1,000 customers and just had the opportunity to observe a lot of different small businesses. And statistically, and I can see this in the customers that we've worked with, a lot of businesses will fail. And a lot of the times it's due to strains on cash flow. So what I mean with that, especially if you're starting out or managing or growing, that it's extremely important that you're not getting essentially over your head on commitments that you're making, or it would be better to, in my opinion, it would be better to grow more slowly than to be so aggressive that you're having to borrow large amounts of money to accomplish different speculative ventures, because a lot of times things don't ultimately go as smoothly as anyone expects them to. And when you're not only trying to manage the stresses of growth, but then also paying back money that you've borrowed or committed to, that can just create incredible stress on a business.
Absolutely. Let me pause you for a second there, Jeremiah, because I know you to be entrepreneurial in spirit, that you rarely have just one thing you're working on. How does that manage the cash? How does that apply to some of the other ventures that you've had along the way? Is that just at WebSpec Design that you've seen that learning, or can you adopt it in other places as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Even as team members come work for the company, if there's financial management or there's a course that is on the radio called Dave Ramsey that has really excellent cash management principles for your life, but you can just really create a lot of messes quickly, whether that's credit card debt, whether that's business or personal, that you're creating a mountain of debt that you then have to pay back. As it applies to, I'm also partners in a sign company and a fireworks company and some property management and apartments. That certainly applies in all of those businesses, and trying to make sure that you're managing when are the customers needing to pay to make sure that you're meeting your material obligations, and also managing the expectations. And in this climate in particular, it's a very rapidly increasing pay rate. So making sure that the pricing is aligned and you know what your input costs are and what is appropriate to be charging for the pricing, making sure that you've got your quality control, because if you quote something and either mess it up or spend too much time working on it, you're ultimately not going to be making anything, and that can make a lot of challenges as well. So the quality control, and in the web spec business, certainly QA, making sure that we're getting it correct the first time, understanding what is needed for the project and building it. So
Awesome. Well, and I think as you talked about the rapidly increasing pay rates that are out there, that's going to tie to your third point. So if the first one was change your hats and the second was manage the cash, the third one is around staying nimble. So how have you seen that play out?
Yeah, so certainly I've noticed, and this is something we're still trying to figure out, but when we're a very small business, it's a lot easier to move things around, or if a project falls through or work falls through, to then go line something up in a different area. But when you're trying to realign a lot more people, it's a lot more difficult to move things around and to jump. So we do have a fairly diverse client base, which is I personally really enjoyed continuing to help small businesses, but we also have very large projects we're working on. So having some diversity in the type of clients and the work that we're doing certainly has helped us adapt through COVID, because once COVID started, anything that was public facing in the food sector, dentist offices, everything shut down. So any projects that they had expected to work on instantly went on pause. And then any of those vendors for those types of clients also had tremendous uncertainty. So they didn't want to move forward on work either. But then fortunately, with some of our work in government and public facing sectors, that was busier than ever because of all of the communication around COVID that needed to be released to the public. So we were able to take some of the shortfalls in work in some areas, move staff to other areas to make sure that we're meeting the demand in those. So if we hadn't had that, it could have been different.
Absolutely. So when you're talking about diversification here and your nimbleness, even in WebSpec Design, you've got a diversity of size and scale of client, the type of work that you're doing, perhaps like which kind of project it is for them, as well as the industries, right? You're all over the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So we've got public companies that we do work for, the government. We do a lot of small nonprofits and small businesses as well. So
you bet. So when you think about your niche, it doesn't have to be, in order to stay nimble, your niche may not be in your target customer group. It may be wise to have a niche in the work that you do, perhaps, or the way that you approach your work, but then diversify on the client base. Is that what you're saying?
yes, absolutely. So for us, a lot of that is a diversification in the client base, but then we also diversify the type of work that we do. So we have, as we've grown, I've continued to try to keep the business organized in teams of, say, 5 to 8 people. So one team really specializes in custom software development. Another team focuses on certain aspects of web marketing. Another team focuses specifically on the agricultural sector and not only develop web and site development for that, but a knowledge base within that sector. So that's one way we've worked to try to stay diverse within the type of work that we do and the clients.
Yeah, outstanding. Okay, so we are here for those of you who have just joined us. We're here with Jeremiah Terhark, and we're talking about 4 lessons learned in growing a small business from 1 to 60 employees. It was his brainchild, it was his idea, and it's his sweat equity that got it started, and now it's a grown entity, 60 employees. And the 4 things that we're on so far, the first one was change your hats. The second was manage the cash. The third was stay nimble. And now the one that's perhaps dearest to my heart, Jeremiah, I can relate to all of these, but this one is the one that sort of touches me the most, the prioritize your non-work life. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I have 4 kids, 15 and younger, and there's definitely been periods with the business, and I think just people can get really tied up in their career in general. And I think that was certainly a lot easier to do before I had the commitments of having family or trying to balance out work, because it's very easy, especially if you own or run a business, to get totally consumed. Even if you're at home, if there's a pressing project or an issue, it's very easy to get in a mindset where you may be physically present somewhere, but your mind is still on your work. So that's something that does continue to be a constant thing to work on and remind myself on, but trying to have some sort of balance and boundaries. For example, if you do have a position or a job where you need to be on call all of the time, trying to have another team member where you can delegate to so you can have some breaks. For example, for the first time about 2 or 3 years ago, we wanted to take a vacation where I just totally unplugged, and I had never done that ever. And that was in 2018. So I actually planned, it took a lot of planning to do this, but I left my computer, I left my phone, I left everything. And then my wife and I went to Europe for 2 weeks. And I think in part that ended up being successful because we were able to plan out and having detailed documentation on who all would do what. And then they were able to be empowered to make decisions while we were gone. But it was very difficult because the first 3 days, it was almost some anxiety on where's my phone? And I'm used to checking my phone. And any time of the day or night, I've got email that comes in that could be addressed then, or most of it is not emergency and could be addressed the next day. So I think that learning to make some boundaries so that you're not totally tied up in the work of the day and that you're also spending time with the family. I've noticed that children are growing up very fast, and people that are older than myself just constantly reiterate on how quickly your kids grow up and that it's really important to spend time with them because then they're grown up and gone. So trying to really take that advice from other older people that I've met and making sure that I'm taking time to volunteer in the community and be active in my faith at church. And so.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Good for you taking those 2 weeks unplugged. I remember when I took my first long July several years ago, I started taking July off because the kids were out of school and my husband was a teacher. And so he had a lot of flexibility in July as well. And I trained my clients that don't call me in the month of July. July is just downtime. And I remember the first time I took an extended vacation and those first couple weeks or those first couple days, that anxiety of wait, but I'm not there. What am I supposed to be doing? And so then it took that to a couple days to get over that and then some time to unwind. And I remember coming back and having one of my employees marvel that, post-vacation Sinikka is a better human than pre-vacation Sinikka. So it's I think it's for the health of our organizations, right? For the health of our leadership skills, as well as for the health of our families and our own personal, well-being. And that taking time off is so valuable.
Yeah, I agree. And we've really emphasized taking some time during the year for team members that work here, and they generally will come back more refreshed and ultimately more productive employees. So we've really tried to have a flexible work environment where there's not a prescribed amount of time off limit that you can take, but it's mainly more about communicating, making sure that your commitments are delegated out and that you can take some time off to focus on yourself and your family. And that really ultimately helps them and our business do better over the long term. So.
Absolutely. Well, I think you hit on another key point of that, which is sometimes you've got to plan for that. It doesn't just happen. You have to be intentional. You have to be deliberate about it. You have to plan for the backup of the backup of the backup, right? If that's what you need, but plan for who's going to take over which tasks and what will you do in certain circumstances. A lot of folks, I think, especially if they're running their own business or if they love what they're doing, they may just say, it's too much work to plan ahead. And then that time is just gone. So any secrets to any of the planning that you've done when you or your teams are able to plan for time away?
A lot of the planning has also come from help or suggestions from the team members of different things that they would like to do. So if listeners are so busy where they're having trouble planning, they probably have someone in their organization that could help them plan it out. Because whether it's a large company or a small one, you get very close relationships and they want to make sure that you're doing well also. So most people are more than willing to help cover the gap so somebody can take a few weeks for themselves or a week or a few days. So, or you could just leave and come back and maybe it'll work out fine. But there's probably going to be more chaos coming back if you don't plan at all.
I think that's fair. As a lifelong planner and a career project manager, I'm an advocate for the plan.
Sounds good.
Oh, that's great. So we were talking about 4 lessons learned in growing a small business from 1 employee to 60 employees. And that's just so phenomenal to think about taking something that was your own idea and your own, hard work as a high school kid, a summer project. And now 20 years later, you're still doing it and it's grown and it has a life of its own. Thank you for sharing your lessons about changing your hat and managing the cash and staying nimble and prioritizing non-work life. As we look forward, what are you looking forward to, Jeremiah, in the next 20 years?
Yeah, so I think the business has changed since it started, but I think that just the culture of continuing to learn, I think 20 years from now, I'm in my 30s now, so I would be in my 50s then. So I think training up leaders as we continue to grow, I think my hope is that we continue to get to know the clients that we work with now and provide more meaningful service for them, but then also continue that word of mouth marketing and meet new clients along the way. So I really, in some ways, that's a difficult question because I really love everything that we're doing day to day. So I don't necessarily have, when I think of goals, it's not that there's things are going poorly today because I love the job that I do, but I think that continuing to build skill sets and learning new things. So whether that's designing for security or accessibility or artificial intelligence things that are coming out, I think just being willing to learn and try new things out for customers and for ourselves. So for our workforce, the rise in COVID, while we could work remotely, we have been an organization that everybody had a home here where they could come in and work from the office. But I think for a lot of organizations, COVID has changed that significantly. So we really embrace that where if a team member wanted to continue to come in, they certainly can. If it works better to come in just a little bit, they can. Or if they want to work totally remotely, they could do that. But what that's enabled to do, especially in this difficult hiring climate, is potentially work with people in other states that have very specialized skills. So really kind of instead of looking at changes as only negative, I think that it's all in how you look at the challenge, because a challenge that comes in is also an opportunity as long as you're able to adapt to that. So for us, it's meant meeting some new people that we wouldn't have met otherwise and potentially working with new clients and trying new things that we would have never thought of had it just been business as usual. So
Absolutely. That disruption that was COVID, I think, created a whole lot of opportunity for a whole lot of people if you're willing to just embrace the opportunity. Certainly, I'm not going to downplay the impact, the negative financial impacts or the economic impacts that people have felt, or certainly not the health impact. I don't mean to downplay it, but there were absolutely opportunities that have come if you're willing to see them and you're willing to embrace them and move towards them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this is the Even Better podcast, so it wouldn't be an episode if I didn't ask my question. What is it, Jeremiah, that's making you even better right now?
Yeah, well, we had an opportunity. So the timing of this is actually last month is when we marked officially 20 years in business. And when we had marked 15 years in business, we had done a community event and invited a whole bunch of people. So that just really wasn't something that we were planning on doing this year. But what we did do is accept applications from nonprofits to volunteer time. And we called it a hackathon. So all the different team members, some came in and some were remotely, and the nonprofits were remote. But we had the opportunity to come in and volunteer for a 48-hour stretch of time over the weekend, and just seeing everybody come together for good causes within the community was really rewarding. And we had a great time a few weeks ago, and that was really a fun project that we did. So
outstanding. Thank you for doing that. Thank you.
Yeah.
For that. What a great service to the nonprofits who needed your help, and what a great opportunity to get your team together.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Outstanding. Well, Jeremiah, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your insights and for spending a few minutes with us. As I was listening to you share your stories, I'm convicted that they are absolutely applicable for business owners as you're growing a business. And I know a lot of folks are going out on their own right now in the post-COVID era, or in the post-pandemic era anyway, or the post-quarantine era. But not just for those who are starting out on their own, but those who are growing businesses and those who are in leadership roles. You've offered us some sage counsel. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Well, for all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. And on behalf of all of us at Your Clear Next Step, we hope the rest of your day is even better.
Thank you for tuning in today. The Even Better podcast will be back with more content soon. But in the meantime, subscribe to our podcast or check out our website at yourclearnextstep.com for more information. See you next episode.